We just now come to the last session, which will be of hormonal assessments in captive elephants. And Ann-Kathrin Oerke is our first presenter. She has a pre-recorded version, which I will, of course, now start. And I hope that all questions will be put in the chat. Ann-Kathrin actually is working at DPZ, which is mostly a primate center, but 25 years ago, latest, she lost her heart to elephants and started the elephant service. She is known here in Serengeti-Park because we always need to collect the poop and bring it to her, or also, every sample actually you can get. And then she's doing very great hormonal assessments for us. I will start the presentation now, share my screen, and I hope you all enjoy this.
Now, one of the topics of this conference is zoo research. And in my talk, I want to show you how zoo research has helped to improve the breeding of elephants in Europe. I could have as well called my talk Zoo Research That Got Stuck in Captivity, because when we invented the so-called non-invasive hormone measurements, which are hormone analysis in urine and feces, we actually wanted to go out in the field and work on free-ranging elephants. However, we realized that the birth rates in Europe at that time were still low. And this table shows you the birth rates between 1950 and 1989 in 10 years intervals. In zoos and circuses at that time was indeed Asian elephants. But there was no keeping of bulls, there was missing knowledge on cycle and puberty in cows, and there was also a high loss of newborn calves, one of which is shown in this picture. This is Motti in Chester Zoo, and he was the only hybrid between Asian and an African elephant. So in time, it was always easier to import young animals instead of trying to breed them in the zoos. However, the same soon came to a stop because, as you all know, elephants are endangered species, and CITES declared import stops for both species. In the Asian elephants, imports were banned in 1976, and in the African elephant, imports were banned in 1989. So at this time, zoos were forced to build up self-sustaining populations of captive elephants. As a first step, the so-called European Endangered Species programs started, and for the Asian elephant, this happened in 1991, and the Stadtbook is in Rotterdam. And for the African elephant, the Stadtbook started in 1993 and is in Wuppertal Zoo. With the Stadtbooks, we had at least record keeping on all the facilities that kept elephants and also on the individual animals themselves. Now, the EEP also gives recommendations, and the most important was that you have to place all potential breeding females in a breeding situation. What is a potential breeding female? First, it is a female in appropriate age, and this is under the age of 25 years. And secondly, it is a female that's reproductively active, and that means she must have ovarian cycles. And at this point, I have to give you a short crash course on reproduction. In elephants, as in all other mammals, the cycle consists of a follicular phase and a luteal phase. Now, during the follicular phase, a follicle develops on the ovary, which grows and eventually ruptures and releases the oocytes. And this happens at ovulation. And it is only at this time when a cow can conceive, because only at this time a sperm can fertilize the oocyte and form an embryo. Now, what is most important is that at the place where the follicle was before, a structure develops, which is called corpus luteum. And this corpus luteum is endocrinologically active and secretes hormone, which is called progesterone, which you possibly all have heard before. Now, accordingly, you will find low progesterone levels during the follicular phase and high progesterone levels during the luteal phase. If the cow conceives, then this corpus luteum will persist and continue to secrete progesterone. And this means that hormone levels stay elevated, and you will eventually be able to diagnose a pregnancy. If the cow did not conceive or was not mated, or there was not even a bull, then this corpus luteum regresses, and accordingly hormone levels drop, and a new cycle starts. So it would be nice if we could just measure progesterone in elephants, but elephants do not really have progesterone. Actually, progesterone levels in elephants are 10 times lower than in other mammals and even in humans. What elephants have are so-called 5-alpha reduced progestins. And these two progestins are metabolized in the liver.
I can take them.
Secreted via the urine. And there's now a species difference between Asian and African elephants, because the main metabolite in Asian elephant is pregnantriol, and the main metabolite in the African elephant is a specific pregnenolone. So actually you need two different hormone assays if you want to measure the metabolite in the two species. And there's another obstacle, because if you use urine, then you will not always find these nice yellow-colored samples, but you will also have samples that look like water, or even samples that are contaminated with feces. And therefore, we need to correct the amount of hormones in the urine sample with the amount of creatinine. And due to the fact that the elephants have such a long cycle, it is enough if you only collect one sample per week. What we did is we stepped out with our urinary hormone analyzers to the zoo and offered our service to determine the reproductive status of elephants in Europe. And the zoos were very happy about it, but they also wanted to have frequent results. And as a consequence, our service runs on a weekly basis, and it works in the way that the zoos are collecting samples on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. They send the samples to Göttingen, to the hormone labs, and then on every Wednesday and Thursday we run the hormone assays. And because they run overnight, the results are sent out one day later by mail, and this is on Thursday and Friday. And this means that the zoos know every week where the elephants are in terms of reproductive status. And this is actually what we produce. You see a hormone profile of an Asian elephant, and it runs over 2 years. So these are all the collection dates, and at each point in this graph represents the hormone value of 1 week. So what you can see is that you have phases of low and of high hormone values. So what, according to what I explained before, these are the values that indicate the follicular phase, and these higher values indicate the luteal phase. Ovulation occurs between the last low and the first high hormone value, and they are indicated here for all the cycles by the red arrow. So actually here you see the profile of a cyclic Asian elephant. And this is a hormone profile of an African elephant. Again, you have the collection dates and here the amount of hormones, and you do not see these regular intervals of high and low hormone values, and this means that this elephant is not cyclic. Now, 20 years ago, I analyzed 526 cycles in 66 Asian elephant cows and 159 cycles in 43 African elephant cows. And I found that the duration of the cycle was on average 15 weeks in Asian and 14 weeks in African elephants. The follicular phase lasted 6 weeks in Asian elephants and 5 weeks in African elephants. And as you can see here, the luteal phase was 9 weeks in both species. I want to point out 3 points at this table. The first one is, with a cycle length of 15 and 14 weeks, an elephant can only conceive 3 or 4 times per year, which is not very much, and you should be aware of this if you want to breed your elephant. The second point is that despite the data are only 20 years old, we still use the shortest duration of the follicular phase to warn the zoos when a female is due to ovulate or come into estrus. And the last point is that we still use the 15 and 16-week threshold to diagnose a pregnancy. So we knew about the cycle of the older females and the breeding females, but we also wanted to know when the young captive-born females would start to cycle. And we had a little bit of an idea because the age of the youngest elephant females at first birth was known from the stud books. And I've listed the 3 youngest Asian elephants here and the 3 youngest African elephants here. And as you can see, 3 of them have a little white star, and that means that these young females were mated by their fathers, and all 3 calves died. Now, the most important information is that Asian elephants gave birth to a first calf between 5 and 6 years of age, and the African elephants between 8 and 9 years. You know that the elephants really have a 2-year pregnancy. That means that the Asian elephants conceived as early as with 3 years and 4 years, and the African elephant was 6 and 7 years, which is very early. So we wanted to know if this is normal for the species, and we monitored females that were aged between 4 and 10 years of age. And we had 14 Asian elephants, of which 6 were captive-born and 8 were imported. And we also had 28 African elephant females, of which 3 were captive-born and 25 were imported. And this is an example of what we found. You see a hormone profile of a young African elephant female. She was born in 1995, and when she turned 5, we started to collect urine from her, and as you can see, she had no cycles. And when she was 6, she also had no cycles. But when she turned 7, she had her very first ovulation here, the second here, and so on. So she was cyclic at this time. And this is the hormone profile of an Asian elephant female. This female was imported. She was born in 1990. And when she was 8, the zoo started to monitor her, but she had no cycles, also not with 9 years of age. But when she turned 10, she had her first ovulation, second ovulation, third ovulation, and here when she ovulated for the 4th time, she was mated and she conceived, and you can see her very first pregnancy here, and birth occurred here. Now, the result of this study was that indeed sexual maturity occurs quite early in captive elephants. In the Asian elephant already with 4 years of age, and in the African elephants with 7 years of age. And you should be aware of this fact in order to avoid inbreeding with a father. And this means that you have to exchange the bull early enough. We also found that captive-born elephants start to cycle earlier than elephants that were imported from range countries. And we found that captive elephants start to cycle earlier than free-ranging elephants. So we had an increasing amount of pregnancy, and we also wanted to know about their characteristics, and we wanted to know whether there were species difference. And I want to show you a pregnancy profile of an Asian elephant. Now you've seen a lot of hormone profiles, and you can read them easily. Conception occurs here, where indicated by the red arrow, and birth occurred here, indicated by the green arrow. I want to draw your attention on the fact that in the Asian elephant, hormone levels stay elevated throughout gestation. And this is in contrast to what we see in African elephant. Again, you have here a profile of an African elephant female. She had a cycle here, and here she conceived, indicated by the red arrow. She had a pregnancy, and then birth occurred here, indicated by the green arrow. And what you can see, and what is in contrast to the profile I showed you before, is that in the African elephants, the hormone level drops to a somewhat lower level during the second half or third of gestation. And this can be an advantage and a disadvantage. The disadvantage is if you only get a few samples from this time or this period of pregnancy, you might as well think that this female is in the luteal phase of her cycle. The advantage, however, is if you know that the female is pregnant, then you can warn the zoo that she's already in the second half of pregnancy and they must be prepared that birth can occur soon. And this is a summary of the pregnancy data. I analyzed 28 pregnancies in 21 Asian elephant cows and 18 pregnancies in 14 African elephant cows. And I found that the duration of pregnancy was 650 days in Asians and 642 days in Africans. And I was also interested in whether there would be a difference between pregnancy with males and female calves. But as you can see, there was no difference in the data in Asians and also not in African elephants. What we, however, found, and which has a practical significance, is that Asian elephants, that 71% of Asian elephants give birth to their calves between days 630 and 670. And in the African elephants shown below, even 78% of cows deliver calves between days 630 and 660. And this is quite a narrow window if you consider the whole duration of pregnancy. The next question was, how quickly can an elephant cow conceive again after giving birth? And here we are talking about the postpartum ovulation, which is the first ovulation after giving birth, and also the first possibility for a cow to conceive another calf. And for this, in order to find out more about this, I analyzed 51 postpartum intervals in 33 Asian elephant cows and 18 postpartum intervals in 13 African elephant cows. And I want to show you what we found because we had quite varying results. So this is the hormone profile of an Asian elephant cow that gave birth to a living female calf. You can see the pregnancy here. And then the cow took 107 weeks until she had her first ovulation after birth. This cow, this is also an Asian elephant cow, and she also gave birth to a living female calf. You can see the pregnancy here. But as you can see in contrast to the profile I showed you before, this cow only took 11 weeks until she had her first ovulation after birth. And this is a bit of a record from the cervix. It's again an Asian elephant cow, which gave birth again to a living female calf. And you can see a pregnancy here, then birth occurred here. And after 26 weeks, this cow ovulated already. She was mated again. She conceived again. And you can see the next pregnancy here. So this calf indeed gave birth to two calves within a little bit more than 4 years. And this graph, this figure shows you the summary of all the results we found here for the African elephants and here for the Asian elephants. And you see that in the Asian elephants, postpartum ovulation occurs after 14 weeks after birth. And in the African elephant, it occurs 49 weeks after birth. And I found that there was no significant difference between the species. Now you get a completely different picture if you look what happens with the calves, whether they are reared or not, or whether they live or not. So actually, you see again the data for the African elephants here and for the Asian elephants here, and all the black dots are calves that did not make it, so that died or weren't raised. And what you can see, for example, for the Asian elephant is that cows started to cycle or to ovulate as on average 14 weeks after birth. And in the African elephants, they started to ovulate 36 weeks after giving birth. And there's a sharp difference between the calves that died and the calves that were alive and raised by the cows. And if you look at these numbers, you will see that Asian elephants with a live calf start to cycle on average 50 weeks after birth, and in the African elephant, 55 weeks after birth. Now, I could find a highly significant difference in the data from the Asian elephants, but not in the African elephants, and this is possibly due to the low numbers I had in my data set. So in conclusion, we can say that in both species, postpartum ovulation occurs after 1 year if the calf survives and is raised by the mother. And this postpartum ovulation interval is significantly shorter if the calf dies or is hand-raised. And we also found that the interbirth interval in captive elephants is therefore shorter than in free-ranging elephants. So we continued to do our hormone analysis, and we measured our samples week by week, and we also provided weekly information on the reproductive status on the elephants. And by now, the service, the elephant service, is running for 27 years, and we analyzed samples from 200 Asian elephants and from 162 African elephants. And the Asians were living in 51 facilities in 14 countries. The Africans were housed in 56 facilities in 14 countries. Now, what you can easily calculate yourself is that we have data from a total of 362 elephants, and this is quite a lot. And if I look into the data of all these females in terms of reproductive potential and cycle, I find that 93% of Asian elephants are cyclic, and almost 88% of African elephants are cyclic. So there seems to be a difference between the two species. And I can tell you, yes, there is one, because the African elephants are much more sensitive to what changes that might affect their cycle. For example, we find that the cycle activity is related to social rank, and that means that we do have groups where the lowest ranking female do not have an ovarian cycle. And we also see that social and environmental changes can induce a cycle stop. And as an example, I want to show you the hormone profile of a young African elephant female that was cyclic and stopped to cycle after the female of the group died. Another point is that if you transfer an African elephant, it will always stop to cycle. So transfers in African elephants always associated with an interruption of the cycle, which is in contrast to the Asian elephant. But I want to give you an example of the female that was transferred. Here's a transfer, that was the old zoo, that's a new zoo, and with a transfer, the elephant stopped to cycle. So this knowledge is also reflected in the birth rates of Europe. And I want to give you, again, a table on this. Here you see the data I presented at the beginning of my talk, and the numbers shown in red here are the most recent data. What you see is that the coordination of breeding through the stubble induced a rise in birth numbers in both species, double in Asian and even threefold in African elephants. And in general, birth rates are rising in Europe. But if you look at the two species, you find that it's mainly the Asian elephants that are still show increasing numbers, whilst the African elephants are on a kind of stagnating level. And we need to find why this is the case. And I gave you some examples for this already. And the last question is, are the elephant population in Europe self-sustaining? And I can give you a clear answer, yes, they are in Asian elephants, but no, they're not yet in African elephants, but we are on a good way. So at the moment, the status for the Asians is that they stop breeding, while in the African, we still promote breeding. And if you look at the action, something happens to me which never happened before, and I thought would never happen. But now I tell the zoo when they have to separate the bull from the calf when they come into estrus. Whilst I still advise the zoo to place the bull with the cow when they are due to ovulate. So in order to improve the numbers for the Africans, we still have to look more into the social need of the females, and that means if I have to do the interpretation of my hormone results, I have to find out, for example, why is an elephant cow not cyclic, and if she's cyclic, why is the group elephant bull not interested in her? So no time to sleep. And all of you that have fallen asleep can wake up now, because I come to the acknowledgements of my talk. And first of all, I want to thank all European zoos that have been sending samples over the last years. And secondly, I want to thank the team from the Hormone Lab at the German Center in Göttingen, most of all my boss, Michael Heistermann, but also Miriam Polten, who's doing the Asian elephant hormone analysis, and Andrea Heistermann, who's doing the African elephant hormone analysis. And this is my last slide, and I hope that I gave you some points to think about, and I'm looking forward to a discussion. And finally, I want to thank you for your attention.
Okay, so I hope everybody can hear me. Yes. I'm sorry, I was not able to collect questions, but there are some. Ann-Kathrin, would you mind choosing one of the 3 questions that we have there in the chat?
When running a male with a part, do not wish to the doctor, is there safer time to mix the herd? Good question. This is actually what we are discussing with the Asian elephant stud book at the moment, but because we do see cycle synchrony between mothers and daughters, and if you want to breed with a daughter but not with a mother, you have a problem because you actually had to separate the mom from the daughter, and this always causes problems. So it's very, very difficult. But in general, if you have to first see whether they're synchronous or not. If they're not synchronous, then you can still let the bull into the herd to breed the daughter, and if the mother had ovulated already. So for this, it's nice to have very quick results, and therefore it's an advantage to have weekly results, because we can already tell when a cow will be in estrus when we see the first value that indicates the follicular phase. I hope this answers your question.
Okay, maybe we can have one of the other 2 because of the time delay.
Okay. So shall I answer the next one, or
whatever you want?
No. Is the interruption of the cycle related to the different social group composition? Do the females also interrupt the cycle when the whole female group is transferred? That's also a good question, because until now we never had a transfer of a whole group or of a whole family. We had the transfer of a group, but since our service is voluntarily, I cannot give you information on whether they stop cycles or not. I can only give you information on females that are monitored. So, but in general, they do stop to cycle, and I cannot say how long. There's no rule how long, but there are some success stories. We had a single female being transferred completely away from her family. She started to cycle. She even conceived. She gave birth to, meanwhile, 2 calves. So it's not forever if they stop to cycle.
Okay, thank you a lot, Ann-Kathrin.
Welcome.
Again, sorry for messing this up before. Our next talk is Dr. Susan Hambrecht. She is a biological assistant in Zoo Magdeburg, and she's also working in Goethe University of Frankfurt, where she also did her PhD thesis. Today she's talking about salivary cortisol levels in captive African elephants as an indicator of physiological stress. Susan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Share my screen. Wait a minute. First the video.
Yes.
Then
So please start when you're ready.
Is correct. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Still fine. Thank you.
Good. So, welcome everybody to my presentation today about salivary cortisol levels on captive African elephants as an indicator of physiological stress. Okay, so I would like to start with a very short introduction to stress, because I think all of you know that stress is a very complex topic. So I will focus only on the main important points in relation to my research. So first, stress is traditionally defined as disturbed homeostasis. So the physiological equilibrium of the organism is kind of out of balance. And because this definition is really broad, everybody can understand that there can be a lot of forces or stimuli or situations which can cause stress. And so these are then called stressors. So causes of stress are stresses. And these stresses can be both physiological or physical or even psychological or emotional. For example, just to illustrate this, can be more physiological, so low body temperature can cause stress, or the other extreme, of course, too high body temperature. And then everything which is perceived as unpredictable or novel or unusual can cause stress in the individual. Of course, the organism or the body has defense lines to combat stress, or better to say, to re-establish homeostasis. About 20 years ago, Moberg defined 4 different types of these so-called stress responses. Today, in this presentation, it's about the neuroendocrine system. And one part of this neuroendocrine system is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, in short HPA axis. This is shown here on the left side. The end products of this hormone axis are the glucocorticoids. And one type of glucocorticoid is the cortisol. Cortisol is also secreted by the African elephant and also by humans into the bloodstream. And as is indicated here, cortisol has a lot of diverse effects on the organism. Basically, on the one hand, it encourages energy mobilization to avoid the stressor or to combat stress. On the other hand, it downregulates processes which are not immediately useful to avoid stress. And as you can see here, these processes which are shown here are basic biological functions, and therefore it becomes understandable that stress cannot be adaptive when it occurs in the long term or in an excessive way. Okay, so now let's get more into the research I did. It was basically about the 2 main tasks of the HPA axis. On the one hand, the cortisol release kind of coordinates everyday life activities with the homeostasis. So when to rest, when to sleep, or to feed, or to socialize. And this coordination is mediated by different types of temporal rhythms. And one of this temporal rhythm of cortisol secretion is the diurnal rhythm of cortisol secretion. So diurnal in this case, because the African elephant is a diurnal animal. The time course of this diurnal rhythm is kind of reasonable, because there are different stressors across the day which occur regularly and therefore predictable for the organism. And the main stressor which occurs every day is the beginning of the activity phase. So getting up in the morning, finding food, whatever, socialize, and therefore you need energy. And that is why cortisol is highest in the morning, like is indicated in the simplified figure. And cortisol secretion then decreases throughout the day, and usually, or theoretically, is lower in the afternoon than in the morning. And the other task is, of course, the response to challenges. So one expects that there's a cortisol increase in response to challenges or stresses in this case. like it is shown here in the simplified figure of a physiological stress response. So the stressor occurred sometime before the increase, of course, then cortisol increases, reaches a peak, and then recovers back to pre-stressor levels before the stressor occurred. This figure also indicates that there is a dependence on the type of the stressor, and theoretically, when the stressor is perceived as more severe, then there's also, of course, a stronger stress response, in this case, a higher magnitude of increase. So this dotted line indicates the response to a more severe stressor, and also the recovery phase is prolonged. Of course, this kind of aspects of the HPA axis are not totally isolated from each other, they influence each other. So let's imagine that there's a stressor in the afternoon, like is indicated here, and then you would measure kind of inverse or flattened diurnal rhythm, because the afternoon level is higher than the morning level. And this was one aspect in which we were interested. So we observed the translocation of an animal. And of course, we were on the one hand interested if there was a cortisol increase in response to the translocation, but also checked if the diurnal variation or rhythm was influenced by this stressor of the translocation. In the second part of the research, we observed the effect of so-called stress management tools on physiological stress. And these stress management tools are tools which is used to improve stress coping abilities, in short. On the one hand, these tools include positive reinforcement training, and on the other hand, environmental enrichment can also be seen as a stress management tool. In short, positive reinforcement training is about rewarding the animal when it shows the desired behavior. And as this management situation occurs really regularly, so usually once per day, sometimes even twice per day, this is of course a situation which is should be really predictable for the elephants. And therefore we expected that there should be no change in cortisol after the positive reinforcement training. In the case of enrichment, it was a bit more complicated because, of course, enrichment is very diverse. Different activities, objects, devices, or, for example, also feeding schedules can be enrichment. We decided to use a more experimental or controlled approach, and therefore presented novel objects to the elephants. And novelty in general, is considered to be a natural stressor. That is why, of course, we expected there should be a cortisol increase in response to the exposure to a novel object. How did we measure physiological stress? We again start with the translocation part of the study. So it was about the translocation of a female African elephant from Réservé-Africain de Sujon in France to Thüringer Zoopark Erfurt in Germany. And this female elephant is called CS. Her name is Jami. And we measured cortisol from saliva. We decided on saliva on the one hand because it allows almost real-time assessment of cortisol changes. On the other hand, it is less invasive than blood sampling. We not only observed the translocated animal CS, but also sampled saliva from the 2 cows who already lived in Erfurt in a destination zoo. And these cows were called, or are called, CH and SF, Chupa and Safari. Here you can see again a small figure of the sample size and the Susus and Wolft. And here you can see the sampling schedule. So we started, of course, with sampling saliva before this transport, which is called a prephase. Then the transport occurred between France and Germany. After the transport, saliva was sampled, which is called a post-1 phase, On day 20, another potential stressor occurred, which was the introduction of Charmy, the translocated cow, to the bull in Erfurt in the destination zoo. And finally, 3 weeks after the transport, which is the post-2 phase, again we sampled saliva. Importantly, in each of the 3 transport phases, we sampled saliva both in the morning and in the afternoon, as we were interested, of course, in the effect on the diurnal variation. Moving on to the second part of the research about training and novel objects. So, as I said before, we observed the response to positive reinforcement training, which is abbreviated as PRT. We asked the keepers to do the training as usual and to include only known commands to the elephant. Only commands known to the elephant. In the case of the novel object presentation, this situation is the situation of the novel object test, and this test situation is a kind of standard personality assessment test in many species, but to the best of our knowledge, it was not yet used in elephants, in both elephant species. So we also checked for behavioral differences, of course, and also consistency of behavioral differences, but these results are not part of this presentation. Maybe in the next conference we'll see. So, of course, also in this part, we measured cortisol from saliva. Here you can see the sample size. So in total, we included 10 elephants in this part of the study, which were housed in 3 different zoos, Opesu, Wuppertal, and Erfurt. The sampling schedule I will show in a minute was repeated several times per elephant, and was also conducted in 2 years, 2016 and 2017. Here you can see the sampling schedule. Per day, 1 elephant was observed, and such a test day started with a saliva sample in the morning. Then the respective elephant was released into its normal daily routine. In the afternoon, a second saliva sample was collected. And after this afternoon saliva sample, either positive reinforcement training or the novel object test took place. And after training or novel object test presentation, again saliva samples were collected. Importantly, samples were collected every 10 to 15 minutes for a total duration of 60 minutes, in order to capture, of course, a potential cortisol response to the situation which occurred before, and also in reference to the sample which was collected before the respective situation. What did we find out? First, we were interested if the 10 elephants observed in the second part of the study showed the expected diurnal variation under their routine management. And here you can see the results. So on the y-axis is the salivary cortisol level, and on the x-axis is the daytime. So gray is morning levels, white afternoon levels. And I think it's obvious that the morning levels indeed were higher than the afternoon levels. So and the difference was around 40% in both years in which the study took place. That's what I said. Here you can see the results in relation to the translocation. So again, y-axis, of course, salivary cortisol level. The above half shows the results of the translocated animal, CS, so the newcomer called here. Below, the results of one of the resident cows which already lived in Erfurt. So the left column shows the diurnal variation in the phase before the transport. So gray, again, of course, morning, white afternoon. And as you can see, morning levels were indeed higher than afternoon levels before the transport. Then the transport happened, and the second column then shows the morning and afternoon levels directly after the transport. The diurnal variation was occurred in the resident animal, However, in the translocated animal, there was a kind of flattening of the diurnal variation. So the afternoon levels were relatively high compared to morning levels and also compared to the other two animals, any other transport phases, of course. And the next column shows the salivary cortisol concentration after the first time introduction of Chami, the translocated cow, to the bull in Erfurt. And I think this was the highest value we measured in the whole study. So you could really interpret this as a cortisol increase. So she really perceived the first time meeting of the bull as stressor. And also in the resident animal, there was a slight or also an increase, but not as high as in the translocated animal. And finally, 3 weeks after the transport, there was, the values indicate normalization of the diurnal variation. Let's move on to the second part of the research. So the effect of positive reinforcement training and the novel object test. In this slide, I just want to show you examples of the individual variation, both within and between the animals. So what you can see here is, let's say the raw data, again, on the y-axis, of course, salivary cortisol level. And these figures are from 3 different elephants, which live in the same zoo to allow a better comparison. Above is the response to training and below to a novel object test. What else? And of course, the x-axis shows the time scale. So 0 minute means before the respective situation, and all other time points below, after the respective situation. Just pick one example. So this elephant, which was a young bull, really had lower cortisol levels than these 2 elephant cows, which were not quite, but relatively old. In addition, there was also a variation between animals. For example, in a young bull, in response to training, the first trial, I call it trial, repeat of the training, there may be a cortisol response, and in the other 2 trials, no response. And also, of course, here the variation between, within the animal is quite obvious. Good, now it shows a model approach. So we use linear mixed modeling to kind of control for this individual variation in order to see the variation caused by the situation itself, so by training or novel object test. The results of this modeling is illustrated here. So it's the same type of figure like shown before in the slide before. Cortisol level depending on the time scale. The black bar always shows the time frame of PRT training or the novel object test in 2016 and 2017. So the model predicted that the situation had a significant effect on the salivary cortisol levels, with the novel object test inducing higher cortisol levels than the positive reinforcement training. In addition, the model showed that the training on average induced a cortisol decrease, while the novel object test on average induced a cortisol increase. So it can also be seen in the figure, of course. Now let's conclude. So of course we try to interpret these results in relation to physiological stress, where the African elephants were physiologically stressed. Here you can see just a small summary of the main result we found. So we had in the resident animals kind of normal diurnal variation, while in the translocated animal, the diurnal variation was quite flat, so relatively high afternoon levels compared to morning levels. In addition, the cortisol increase in response to the introduction to the bull was highest in the translocated animal. And this really shows, on the one hand, that the translocated animal mounted a stress response. And it also, again, validates, of course, the usefulness of saliva to measure cortisol responses, because literature clearly shows that translocations are stressors for the animals. However, we could not found really significantly higher salivary cortisol levels after compared to before the transport. And we assume this was a kind of methodological thing, because the elephant keepers were not able to sample saliva immediately after Charmy left the transport grade when she arrived in Erfurt, because he was just too exhausted from the journey. We suppose that was the case. So when you use saliva to measure cortisol changes, you really need to sample as fast as possible to capture the cortisol response in response to a specific stressor. Now, on second, we found on average a cortisol decrease in response to training. So this, of course, indicates the expected stress buffering effect of positive reinforcement training. And this is totally reasonable because, as I said before, this situation is really familiar to the elephants. So the elephants may, when he sees, okay, the gate opens, there's the keeper, there are the targets, there's the food bucket, okay, now it's training time. So we assume that the situation is highly predictable for elephants, and also some kind of controllable, because the elephant kind of can control through its behavior the reaction of the keeper. And these two, predictability and controllability, were shown to be psychological factors shown to lower stress. Finally, we found on average a cortisol increase in response to the novel object. However, it's in fact that it was really only a moderate increase, a very moderate increase. So novel object can be mild stressors. In addition, not all elephants, of course, mounted a cortisol response. So it's just the average time course. Now, on my last slide, I would like to raise 3 additional important points. First, if you could not measure cortisol increase, this does not mean that the animal did not experience stress, of course, because, as I showed on the first slide, there are other channels of stress responses. For example, it's quite reasonable to assume that, especially in the case of the novel object test, the elephants had a lot of behavioral options to cope with potential stress. So the novel object test occurred in their enclosure, which they know. So they had, of course, the opportunity to just move away from the novel object test, or to go back into the box, or whatever. Yes, and our findings also support the general view that positive reinforcement training and enrichment promote stress coping and resilience. In the case of the present study, it was more obvious in the immediate decrease in response to the training, but also such acute or short-term stressors and stress is considered to be beneficial for the animal, because, of course, it allows animals to gain experience, to cope successfully with stresses, then to gain experience, and to mount an even better stress response in the future. Finally, very important, as I showed in one slide, there's, of course, individuality of the stress response. We also, of course, examined the effect of certain factors like age, stress, and so on. Due to time constraints, I couldn't show it here. But in general, of course, it would be very interesting if it would be possible to to examine which factors really determine this individuality of the stress response, and then kind of manage the stress experienced by the animals. Finally, of course, I have to thank a lot of people. So first of all, my former working group, which is the Bioscience Education and Zoology Working Group at the Goethe University in Frankfurt. And then the Endocrinology Lab team at the German Primate Center, Michael Heistermann, Ann-Kathrin Oerke, Andrea Heistermann, and Miriam Polten. And of course, the 3 zoos involved in the study and the people responsible for my research in the respective zoos. And big thank you to all elephant keepers who contributed to the study, and not only for saliva sampling, but also for very valuable and interesting discussions about the stress, of course, but also about the sampling design and how to realize the study. And thank you for your attention. And I am looking forward to your question, if there are any questions.
Thank you a lot, Susan. We have a question actually in the chat. So it's one, I won't share my screen for that. Maybe you can read it.
In the chat, you mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this was the last one from Katie.
Mm-hmm.
So you mean if a stereotyping elephant had lower levels than a non-stereotyping animals? Do I understand it correctly?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, if an animal is stereotyping, if you recorded their cortisol levels, the cortisol levels may not actually say that they're stressed, because they're stereotyping, they're showing it through a different response.
If you had indeed one cow who stereotyped when she was kind of alone in the box, so she did not know what will happen next. But it's really, so of course I did not sample saliva after the stereotyping, so this was not my focus of my research. But actually, this cow also was one of those elephants which had rather higher cortisol levels on average. But it's really difficult to now I'm missing the English word, to bring it back to one certain factor. So this cow was also quite old, and also we found out that old elephants and female elephants may have higher cortisol levels. So I'm sorry, I cannot really answer your question in detail. So.
Okay, so thank you a lot for this very interesting talk. We are just heading on. Our next talk is Franziska Hoerner. She is a PhD student of Uni Wuppertal and working in a cooperation with the zoo in Wuppertal. She is studying the elephant groups in all Europe, and she is showing us today a project that is mostly about the elephants closer to us in Germany. She was also studying our group. That's where we met first. Her title is What an Odour Can Tell an Elephant, Evaluation of Recognition and Family Bonds in Zoo Elephants by an Olfactory Test. So if you're ready, you can start.
Hello and welcome to my talk on what an odour can tell an elephant. I'm very glad that you're all still here and awake for the last talk, especially as it's about elephants, so very exciting. Let's talk about elephants a bit more. And before I start, I would like to ask you all a question, namely, would you recognize a family member just by the smell? While you think of this and probably think, yes, for sure, nobody smells as good as my husband, I would like to specify this question a little further, saying, would you recognize that family member just by the smell if you hadn't seen that family member in 12 years? Maybe by now the first few of you grow a little uncertain, and I want to specify the question even further, saying, Would you recognize a family member just by the smell if you hadn't seen him or her in 12 years if you were an elephant? Now, unfortunately, none of us has a nose as long as an elephant. However, the project I will present you now worked on answering that question. To the background and the known data. So there is testing of the olfactory recognition of in situ living African elephants by Bates et al. From 2008. And the result of their study was that elephants do recognize family members just by the scent of the feces. However, there is no such information for ex situ living African elephants. And this leads us to the aims of the study. So we had several questions. First of all, will elephants olfactorily recognize each other even after long-term absence? Something that's possible to measure with captive elephants. And the second question, how will they react on fecal samples of relatives? We also wanted to extend our knowledge at that point and a testing of the long-term memory of the species, and also a great chance of testing a new tool and the project I present now. So to the material and methods, obviously in this case, the elephants were our material or part of it. So we had 2 mother-daughter groups in 3 German zoos, and then the stud book for the African elephants recommended to reunite those 2 mother-daughter groups. So we had Bibi, one of the mothers, and her daughter Panya, and then we had Puri, one of the mothers, and her daughter Tana. And then it was decided to transfer Panya to her mother, and those 2 had been separate for 2 years. And then afterwards, Puri was supposed to travel to Tana after 12 years of separation. All this arose the questions I mentioned before. What we did was we presented all females 3 different fecal samples. The first was the test sample of the mother, respectively daughter, so the relevant sample. And then we had 2 control samples. Control sample 1 was of a female of the group. This was just to check whether the elephants would simply react on the experiment. And the second control sample was of an unknown elephant, also a female elephant. Here a reaction was expected, however, not a reaction as strong as to the relevant test sample. The following graphic presents a bit more, visualizes a bit more what we did. So all samples were presented separately, as all 3 experiments were performed with all 4 elephants. We had a total number of 12 experiments, and samples were presented in random order, all at the same day, and the whole experiment was conducted once. During the experiment and afterwards, we analyzed the behavior. So the implementation of the study was according to Bates et al., as mentioned before, and we video recorded the elephants' reactions to the experiment. First of all, we counted the number of trunk reaches toward the sample. So for how often did the elephant touch the sample with the trunk or reach for it? And then we measured the duration of interest, meaning for how long did the elephants linger around the sample, for how long did they show interest exactly in the sample. And those 2 aspects were to answer the question, will the elephants react? And then there was this third aspect of the occurrence of agitated behavior, meaning did the elephants show any agitation and react with agitation to the sample, not only as long as the elephants stayed close to the sample, but in general during the experiment. And this was supposed to answer the question, how will the elephants react? So we come to the results and the interpretation, and here I'm really excited to show you a video. Here you can see elephant cow Puri, the mother elephant, in Tierpark Berlin. In front of her is a sample of her daughter Tana, and she hadn't seen or smelled her daughter in 12 years. Watching this sequence makes me happy every single time. So you could see that she reacted with all signs of agitation. She lifted her head, ears, trunk, tail. She paced backwards. She went back to the sample, touched it a second time. There was agitation in her whole body, and she even expressed the typical rumbling noise. So a very intense reaction. To the recorded behavior. So the signs of agitation are listed here. You could see most of them in the video before by Puri. And as we can see, the mother elephants in the study reacted with a whole range of agitated behavior, while the daughters did not show the full variety of possible agitated behavior. Also important to mention here is stereotypical behavior, only shown by one of the mothers, Bibi. And please keep that in mind because it will be important for the following results. So to the trunk reaches. Here on the y-axis, you see the number of trunk reaches toward the sample. Dark and light blue are the control samples, and green is the relevant test sample. So here you can see that most elephants touched the relevant sample most often, with one minor exception. And in general, not all elephants showed the same amount of trunk reaches. The important information here, there is most elephants touched the test sample most often. To the duration of interest, on the y-axis we have time in minutes, and dark and light blue are the control samples again, green is the test sample. Here it becomes more obvious, so all elephants showed the longest duration of interest in the relevant test sample and almost no interest in the control samples. The important information there is all elephants showed most interest in the test sample, they showed almost no interest in the control samples. Sum of duration of agitated behavior, so again time in minutes, and dark and light blue would be the control samples. However, as you can see, almost no elephant showed any interest or agitation as a reaction to the control samples, with one minor exception again here, and all elephants reacted with agitation to the relevant sample. Now you can see that the elephant cow Bibi reacted with a very high amount of agitated behavior. This is due to her habit of stereotypical behavior, as mentioned before. The important information here is all elephants showed agitation in reaction to the test sample. Almost no agitation was shown as a reaction to the control samples. To come to the conclusion and to the questions of the aims of the study. So first of all, we wondered, will the elephants recognize each other olfactorily, even after long-term absence? And here we can say absolutely yes, they do. The second question was, how will they react on fecal samples of relatives? And now we can say they reacted with signs of agitation, which are positive according to several sources. Something that was new information was that the mothers reacted stronger than the daughters, especially in the quality of their reaction. And this also leads us to the outlook for this study, because we need further investigations, first of all, on why do mothers react stronger than daughters. So far, we can only speculate on that. And this is also a practical tool for future transfers, as we regularly transfer elephants to keep the genetic diversity, and hereby we could predict the possible reactions on reunifications or unifications in general. But we obviously need further experiments. So far, this is only a case study, and you could also regard this as a pilot study. So we need larger sample size, and we should also do tests on other relationships, because so far we only tested mother-daughter relationships. What I want to leave you with is a success after the reunifications, which are also monitored. Here you can see elephant cow Puri, the mother from the video before, on meeting her daughter Tana for the first time after a separation of 12 years. The results of that part of the study might be presented next year, so stay tuned. And with this enlightening view, I want to thank you all for your attention, and also a great thank you goes to all zoos and the DPZ that participated in the study, and especially to the zookeepers that worked very close with me and made all this possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Franzi. That was a really great talk. So we have one question so far, which is, how were the samples transferred between the zoos? Did you freeze the samples?
Yes, an interesting question. I did not freeze them. I collected them actually very shortly before the experiment, so one day before, and then I put them into a cool box with a lot of freezed cold accus. So they were not frozen, but I kept them cold.
Actually, some of these transferings have been done between us too. Thank you a lot for this experience. It was always a pleasure. Okay, so since we reached the end now, Edu is now sending out a link, which is a survey to please rate on the best poster and the best symposia, so we can have a winner in the end. So there's the link. Please participate in that. That would be amazing. Thank you. So now I share my screen because since this is the end of the first international meeting here in Serengeti-Park, I of course want to summarize a bit. And please let me know if you can see that.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So just to have a quick wrap up here, this was a wonderful day. I hope you all agree. I just click forward now to show you. So we started with Dr. Jörg Ganshorn today as a former student of Hamburg University. I really felt like there was me back in university, him having the talk about his lemurs. The motivation behind all those studies is just great, and I really felt great when I heard that he will be a keynote speaker. Just to have him back here in our conference, that was really, really nice. Yeah, the next one was a collection of two young, very motivated researchers. We found out a piece of modern art here, very interesting. But when I saw these faces here being motivated and enthusiastic about their research, it really gives hope to have science policy interactions to really go behind the reasons of trade bans and save biodiversity here. So thank you for these great talks. Yeah, the next one was Kathrin Kopp. She was showing us also great results about zoo research. And while I was watching this talk, I felt a little bit reminded by some hairstyles we had the last days when also in Germany people were not able to go to the hairdressers. Maybe one of you can see yourself in here, and maybe you also use the mirrors at home just to see different faces again. So I really felt like finding myself in there. We probably all shared food with our partners and family members. I hope you all did. And what I also learned from Kathrin today is that being a very slow tool user is okay. So thank you for this talk, Kathrin. Dr. Julia Fischer today was showing us about results about, or informing us about the many colors of baboon. I noticed that 3 of those species are quite common in zoos, the others are not, or at least I have not been in zoos housing these. So I really would like to see what is the reason behind that. Maybe next year further research. Also, very interesting, this piece of art here with the female that was going around a lot, and I think this baboon research is very necessary and also very great. Thank you. So Verena Beringer was not only looking like a cool pilot here while she was having her talk, she was also providing us with very, very cute designs of healthy and unhealthy chimpanzee and those amazingly cute pictures, which I enjoyed a lot. Actually, in these times, ape health is so important, and I really would like to hear more about the options we have in zoo-housed apes. So, thank you, Verena. Dr. Marina Scheumann, I also know as a student, which I enjoyed a lot as a teacher back in these days. And of course, I know the stories and the pictures of Serengeti-Park, which you can see here, and with our typical cars, and which I also enjoy a lot, is seeing a baby rhino, which is very prominent at the moment here in our park. And I always love those proportions of these big bottles that go into elephants, rhinos, which you see sometimes on the pictures. It's just so great to see. And in the end, this one I like too, because everything comes down to poo. That is something we learned here and will further learn. To Angela, we wish that she will get well soon. Sadly, she couldn't be here, and we of course dearly hope that she will come next year again, or first then. Yeah, big applause to Ricardo. He was having two following great talks. Parrots is always a very sensible topic, especially also in the trading region, but also a very attractive animal in zoos. Yeah, we are really happy to have such a very entertaining and good talk. And yeah, I appreciate a lot that you were having two talks after each other. So thank you a lot. Yeah, dear Ann-Kathrin Oerke, I'm very sorry for messing the first part up. Still, I really, really appreciate your talk. It's a very great work you're doing here for us. Again, everything comes down to poo. Here, you also provided us with very, very cute animal pictures. So thank you for that. And I hope that we will keep on working together and will have a lot of contact in the future. Thank you. So, Susan, I really liked your talk because it has those very interesting moments. So I was so amazed by this little robot toy that, in the proportion to the elephant, again, then obviously caused stress in me. Yeah, elephants in snow, you don't often see that. So yeah, I'm really interested, as stress also as a very important topic in housing animals in general. And I think that is great research that is so necessary for all our housing species. Yeah, we have here the professional tickling team that would cause stress, of course. So yeah, maybe you could have research on that too. Last but not least, Franzi, thank you a lot. This was actually a huge project here. Everybody was involved, a lot of people were involved, and everybody of those were very, very nervous. And I like most this little picture of Bibi here, which is, I think, very accurate. And I had, my heart was blooming when I saw this picture of Tana and Pori. Because, as you know, it's nearly the same to Bibi and Panya, and this was a very emotional moment, and I thank you a lot for having the study and making here these moments possible. And actually, this reaction from Pori is the greatest reaction I have ever seen on a poo. So this is something only a mother obviously can experience. So thank you all the speakers, and I'm heading over to Edu.
Okay, thank you so much, Friederike. That was really funny. So I think a nice way to end the evening in a lightweight manner. So I appreciate you putting together all those presentations to say, or the wrap up to say thank you to the speakers and the other presenters. So we have we have a really incredible trend towards the winners of the best poster and the best symposia. So I will share my slide so that you can all see that. And the winners are, for the best poster is Ricardo, congratulations. And for the best symposia is Franziska. So congratulations to the both of you, and you are the winner of our first ever Best Poster and Best Symposia awards. So we will get in touch with you soon to let you know what you have won. So nice work on the presentation. We just want to tell everyone next year that we want to have the conference between the 31st of March and the 2nd of April. So next year we're going to go hybrid, because we see it's also important for a lot of people that are not in Germany or not close enough to travel, that they can also access the conference from online. And then I know majority of you would prefer to be there in person, so we want to do both. We're going hybrid next year. We would also want to have workshops on site, which is what I had initially mentioned, so that we have this anticipation of a future contribution. So if you have any ideas for interesting topics on the workshops or on topics that can be raised during for conference presentations, please contact us at our email address, conference@serengeti-park.de. So again, I want to say thank you to all our speakers. For Dr. Angela Stuja, please get well soon. And thank you all for putting together your incredibly interesting presentations and for entertaining us with your findings. We hope that there are a lot of future contributions and that people can take your work and improve their animal management sectors or provide funding for additional projects. I wish you success in the future. The same goes to our symposia and poster presenters. We also want to say thank you very much. So you all did an incredible amount of work. We are very excited that you chose to present your work at our first conference, and we hope to see you next year. We want to say thank you to our external sponsors, Transgourmet, Recker Feinkost, die Sparkasse Bremen, Alles Getränke, und Journal of Zoological and Botanical Gardens. So from the journal, it's an international journal that started February of last year. I had shared with you their booklet. So hopefully you have a chance to look at it and consider sending in a publication or manuscript for publication. So from the very bottom of our hearts, on behalf of Friederike Hoerner, Stefan Worm, myself, our steering committee, which includes Dr. Fabrizio Zepe, I want to say thank you all so much for participating in our first conference at the Serengeti-Park Hodenhagen. See you next year.